Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, for having me over for such a honored and reverent, full of reverence event. Because we all are participating in one of our special, very, very special days as India is celebrating 75th anniversary of its independence. It is also celebrating 126th birth anniversary of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, the brave son of Ma Bharati, who knew no impediments when it came to the freedom movement, dreamt of independent India, and gave freedom struggle a new direction. And that new direction, which developed and awakened a consciousness that would tear the imperialist forces and the darkness of slavery through and through, and change the mindset of people who were so overpowered by the imperialist forces. And he challenged it all by simplicity of his words when he said that I will not beg for freedom, but I will take it. Now imagine what a challenge these words would have been to the powers of those period which controlled half the globe. And when the chapters of Netaji's history will be read and reread and have been reread, we all come across that this man was a person with rare qualities which showed the way for the freedom struggle. His thoughts and endeavors had earned a distinctive place in the liberation cause because whatever be the discourse after the independence after 1947, and even at that point in time, the pliant leadership was trying to decide in a certain way. But this person had taken up the course which was needed for those times to awaken that consciousness and ask people that give me blood and I will give you freedom. Now imagine to withstand that kind of pressure, which is tiding against the tide, against the mightiest of the whoever, emancipating India out of the yaw, the kind of strong determination that this person, this leader had displayed at that time, I can just imagine that the kind of life, the kind of sacrifices, and when Tashir Desh is mentioned before me, I can only say he had all the possible opportunities to live like a prince, but he chose not to live like one. He chose to be out in the open and serve Ma Bharati and take help from whoever it had to be taken from. And when we look at him, we also know that the waging of the war of freedom or freedom struggle wholeheartedly had its own implications. And thus, give me blood and I will give you freedom was another war cry with which he generated that kind of enthusiasm amongst the depressed gentry of that time, which had given up the idea of freedom. And he also forewarned people that freedom determines and will be determined by the amount of sacrifices we make. Unfortunate part of the history is that more than 50%, 60% of his army ended, I mean, they all lost their lives while entering India via Kohima. And yet, that sacrifice is not counted in the freedom movement. So, total strength of the uh, army was close to 60,000, less than 60,000, 58, 59,000, and out of which 26,000 or so, or 27, 28,000 people had died. And they are not even remembered in the modern army. Now, imagine if you put this figure as per the figure, not to undermine any sacrifice. Every sacrifice for the nation and every sacrifice for the nation building is to be recognized. My only grievance is that when these people lost their lives for the freedom of India, that recognition should have been accrued to them. That's the only point I'm making. Because post independence, the kind of wars we have fought, close to 25,000 army soldiers, our soldiers have sacrificed for the nation. And at that point in time, close to 28,000 people had sacrificed. And all these names should have been commemorated. All these names should have been written in letters of gold. And people who took away because this fact also nobody knows, that people, when attacked Hussainiwala, they took away the bust of Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, and Rajguru, which was made of gold. And today we have displayed those figures in another metal. But my point is, these factors of history are never displayed to us. This history needs to be told to people so that all those who get derailed in life, get motivated by the wrong ideas, need to be motivated by the right philosophy. And these personalities, these heroes are the heroes. Their charisma has to run through the centuries, and generations after generation has to look up to them. So his determination to go against the tide is something which is for display, and anyone can, even if, anyone, even his most celebrated critics cannot go against the fact that this man stood against the tide, and he showed the resoluteness to uproot the British insubordination, and thus traveled to Germany, had a work with Japanese, and whoever he could get across to, and the motivation was not to enroll himself with those philosophies, but the motivation was to free the country of his birth, and that is what I call real Desh Bhakti, because the morality of the entire Desh Bhakti movement has to be against the ones who are challenging your freedom. And thus he also happened to mention that the freedom for Indians meant a different kind of freedom. The liberation was liberation of the soul, where people wanted to rise above lust, greed, and those kinds of activities. But freedom here meant political freedom. Freedom here meant beyond social bondage. And thus, the freedom, the concept of freedom, which had to be understood by the people of that time, he framed it. He framed that particular concept absolutely in the most decisive manner, which could be translated easily through the communications which people had to come across to. And when I think of him as a leader, I look at that time frame, and I will say, that was a time frame when women did not, as a woman, I mean, as a woman, you respect men who respect women. So as a woman, I feel that was the time when British, who were the most powerful political force of their time, they did not recognize women as even individuals who could enter into agreements, or who could uh, individual who could be recognized as a person, as individual. And there was a different kind of struggle. Now, here is a man coming from a nation which was a slave nation and had undergone a whole lot of transformation in the negative manner because of 1,000 years or 800 plus years of slavery that this country had seen. And coming from that point of view, he raised Rani Jhansi Regiment. He talked about people from every caste, religion, or uh, 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 you know any format he could think of. He was above all this, and the only purpose, the only goal was to free India. And thus, in terms of strategic affairs, in the realm of strategic affairs, I think this is a remarkable example. Remarkable example because as a strategy, it was important to build India, which was beyond all these things, which I think a work, I would say, is still in progress. We are still struggling against many inbuilt biases, and thus I would say he was one person who showed the way, who was the leading light of his times, and as a master strategist, did not hesitate to take help from whoever the help was needed. And this was his ethic, the ethical and spiritual ideas, as mentioned before me by Mr. Datta, that the entire persona was of a ethical living, and spiritual ideas which were guiding him through and through, which is completely in consistency with the Indian culture and civilizational ethos. So if we again look at him and dissect his life, we come to know that discipline, regulation of power, and managerial capacities uh, were in plenty, and which keeps manifesting at every aspect of his life, especially when national security was was the challenge. And today also, when I'm trying to replicate that time period with today's time period, I feel the fragile borders and non-traditional security threats which keep happening to us is still a challenge. So his ideas need to be thought over, getting people together, getting the thought processes consolidated, so that the uncompromising endeavor to combat such challenges can be met efficiently. And Netaji, I believe, I mean, I'm sure, like me, there are millions whose hero he happens to be. He continues to lead India, and I would say New India, as talked about, as the power being consolidated around that idea. The prime ministers repeatedly talked about it, and when prime ministers mentioned the idea of India, the idea of India's nationalism, where he mentions that idea of India's nationalism is neither narrow nor selfish and not even aggressive. So idea is inspired by the values of Satyam Shivam Sundaram. This is precisely the quote which Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose had given. And he remains an embodiment of valor and courage, um, ideals, energy, austerity. I think every leader needs to be full of these aspects, and thus these become very important. And when we are serving Mother India, when we are doing our duty, that duty can be best performed when we keep remembering Netaji's sacrifice, and he continues to be an inspiration for all of us. And every decision of Free India, um, every step that he took to shake the imperialist powers, and every step that the forces he gathered to shake the imperialist powers, and when he went abroad, that consciousness which he awakened. I think even while staying outside the country, he strengthened the country, and that was the force of Azad Hind Fauj. I would, say that while concluding my remarks, I would say that when we are celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav as declared by the Prime Minister of our country, and further declared 23rd Jan as the Parakram Diwas, and is going to be celebrated in the most grandeur of the manner, and showing our government's commitment to the memories of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. His traditions of sacrifice, valor will continue to inspire the generations after generation, and the pride in our experiences and heritage, I think, will get rerooted in our existence. With these words, I would like to say thank you, everyone. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.